Hi, I'm Sean Keef. I'm a security engineer with Skybox Security, and I'll be demonstrating the Skybox Security Suite for you today. In this video demonstration, we will explore how Skybox can be used to increase the return on investment for remediation dollars through patch optimization. Most companies remediate based on vulnerability severity. The problem with this is that critical vulnerabilities that aren't imposing risk are remediated before high and medium severity vulnerabilities that are imposing risk. This causes risk-producing vulnerabilities to impose their risk longer than necessary. We're in Skybox Risk Control now, looking at vulnerability prioritization. This is the process that increases return on investment for remediation activities and helps with patch optimization. So we start by importing vulnerability data on top of that network model that we looked at earlier. And vulnerability data, we call it vulnerability instances. This is a vulnerability that exists on a specific host. In our model right now, we have 2,092 of these vulnerability instances. On the right-hand side here, I can see the discovery method. I see that I've found most of them using the Foundstone scanner, as well as some that were discovered using our own vulnerability detector product. This vulnerability data is correlated with a content dictionary that our development team updates on a daily basis. We've got a team of developers that monitor 11 different vulnerability feeds. Feeds like X-Force, iDefense, DeepSight, and feeds that come from individual vulnerability scan manufacturers. We look for new vulnerabilities and compile them together into a content dictionary. This content dictionary has additional information about the vulnerabilities. So if I look at one of these particular vulnerabilities, I can see the external catalogs. So these would be all the different places where this vulnerability could be seen in other products. I can also see external URLs. These are different places where an administrator might want to go to explore information about this particular vulnerability. I also have solutions that come from those URLs. These would be patches, fixes, workarounds, even IPS signatures that could be implemented to remediate or mitigate this particular vulnerability risk. One of the most important aspects of our content dictionary is the CBSS data. We look at a vulnerability from the perspective of what would happen if this vulnerability were exploited. We look at that from three different perspectives: availability impact, integrity impact, and confidentiality impact. We also give the vulnerability a CBSS base score. This data is crucial in determining how much risk a vulnerability is imposing on the network. One of the questions that we want to ask is, how much do I care that a particular vulnerability is on a particular asset? So the CBSS impact data tells us what happens if that vulnerability is exploited. Now we want to match that up with business units and assets. Our business units and assets describe the customer's critical assets and are grouped into asset groups. So in my finance database asset group, under business impacts, I describe how bad it would be for certain things to happen to that asset group. So I can see that I consider damage to be very high if I lost availability of this asset group. I would also consider damage to be very high if I lost confidentiality and integrity of that group. It's because the asset group is mission critical, it's used every day, and it contains financial information. In addition to scoring things from this low, medium, high perspective, we can also assign a dollar value to what would happen if certain vulnerabilities were exploited on certain assets. Sometimes it takes a dollar value to get upper management's attention. Okay, so we have our vulnerabilities, We have our critical assets. These are being modeled on top of our network model. The last component is our threat origins. Again, our threat origins are virtual bad guys. They're fairly simple constructs. They're made up of the location where this threat could come from, the attacker skill, and the likelihood of attack. Now we take all of these components, run them through attack simulation to determine risk. And we'll look at risk from 3 different perspectives. We'll look at it from the perspective of the asset group itself, and here I can see the different asset groups and what level of risk they're currently at given the vulnerabilities that are on the hosts in those groups. I can see my finance database asset group is at a fairly high level of risk right now. I can also look at this from the perspective of threat origins. This tells me what attack vectors or virtual bad guys I would need to worry most about. I would answer questions like, do I need to worry most about an attack coming from the outside or the inside of my network? Lastly, we can look at vulnerabilities themselves. This is where the real return on investment comes from. If you remember, we had over 2,000 vulnerabilities, and over 400 of those were critical vulnerabilities. What I have in this list right here are the actual vulnerabilities that are imposing risk in my network. If I fix these 18 vulnerabilities, I reduce the risk in my network. I can see that only 10 of those vulnerabilities were critical vulnerabilities. So if a company were to use the traditional method of remediating critical vulnerabilities first, they would remediate hundreds of vulnerabilities that weren't causing any risk in the network before they ever made it to the high and medium vulnerabilities that were causing actual risk. Another powerful feature of risk control is our Attack Explorer. Attack Explorer gives us the ability to visualize possible attacks that could occur on the network. In this case, I'm looking at finance servers, and I'm seeing all the possible ways my finance servers could be attacked. This is data that was derived using our attack simulation. I can take any one of these lines and highlight it to see what that individual attack would look like. In this case, I can see the internet hacker has the ability to compromise 2 machines in my DMZ. Compromising those would cause a complete loss of access or a complete gain of access from the perspective of the hacker. Every time a host can be compromised and lose complete access, our attack simulator runs all the attacks possible from that host. This allows us to understand stair-step or pivot attacks. So in this case, I can see that from either my DNS server or my FTP server, an attack could be made against my finance servers. These attacks won't cause a complete loss of control, but they will cause a loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Oftentimes, people will ask, how can somebody get from the DMZ back to where my finance servers exist? Well, we can show you that as well. If you click on this blue line and say, show me an access analyzer, it'll bring up our mapping product. We can do an analysis and find out exactly how somebody could get from the DMZ to my finance area. And so here I can see the path that would be followed from my DMZ to my finance area. I can see the 3 firewalls that are in the path, and I can even drill in and look at the individual rules that are allowing that access to take place. In summary, risk control provides administrators the tools they need to identify and prioritize vulnerabilities based on the amount of risk those vulnerabilities impose in their environment. It also increases the return on investment for remediation activities.